Alright, so today I want to show you several different ways you can actually make a ball python with a different eye size. You can actually increase the size of the eye to make it almost like bug-eyed, really big eyes. And you can also make ball pythons with really tiny eyes, almost like micro eyes. And it really depends on which genes you mix in with the ball python to get these interesting effects. As a matter of fact, a lot of people consider these genetic defects, and some people will say you should stay away from breeding these certain genes together to kind of avoid having the really big eyes or the really small eyes. And some people absolutely love it. As a matter of fact, people come up to my table at the reptile shows and they're like, I really like that ball python with the really big eyes. It's kind of interesting. And usually the ones with the big eyes, a lot of times they're actually the blue-eyed leucistic, the all-white snake with the really big bug eyes. It's kind of interesting. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you several ways that you can adjust the eye size of your ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here at morphmarket.com and I want to start with this snake right here. This is actually a lesser, and it has a really good zoom on the head where you can actually see the eye really good. And I'd say this is probably your normal eye size for a ball python. And sometimes it takes a keen eye to kind of pick out, alright, is that a big eye or is that a slightly small eye? And I picked one out here that is pretty much a normal sized eye. And I'd say pretty much all across ball pythons, if you just have a single gene animal with one single gene, I'd say pretty much in all cases you have just a normal size eye. You don't really get a change in the eye size unless you start breeding certain genes together, which is kind of interesting. So if you actually take a lesser, breed it to another lesser, 25% of the time you get a super lesser, and the super lessers are pretty much known for bug eyes. And take a look at this. I actually pulled kind of an extreme example of a super lesser bug eye over here. Look at the eyes on this snake. This is so comical. They're really super big eyes. And some people, they see this, at tables at the reptile shows, and they're like, I absolutely love the really big kind of alien eyes. It almost looks like it's from outer space or something. That's pretty interesting. And a lot of times you'll actually see on super lessers, I'd say maybe about 50% of the time, it's a pretty high occurrence of getting bigger eyes than normal. You can actually get super lessers that have, pretty normal eyes in some cases, but I'd say, it's probably the #1 combination where, if you're actually thinking of bug eyes, most people think of the super lesser. And the lesser is also pretty much the same as the butter. A lot of people think the lesser and the butter are the same. I actually did a comparison video comparing the lesser to the butter, and I have found some differences. I think the butters can be a little bit brighter in some cases, and I think the lessers can be a little bit darker. And there's definitely some overlap where you see lessers that look almost exactly like butters. And both of them are pretty much exactly the same. They're both in the blue-eyed leucistic, and if you breed it with any other gene in the blue-eyed leucistic, you get an all-white snake with blue eyes. And I actually pulled up kind of an extreme example of a super butter. Take a look at this one. This one is, look at the eyes on this one. These are like bugging out like I've never seen any eyes. And I'd say most of them, these are like the two most extreme examples that I've ever seen bug eyes over here at Morphmarket. Most of the times they have a little bit bigger eyes, but nothing like this, just like bugging out. As a matter of fact, on this ad, you can actually see this one says the super butter big eyes, kind of a crazy looking snake. So take a look at this. This is actually the Mojave. And a lot of people say if you want a blue-eyed leucistic, an all-white snake with the blue eyes, and you want the perfect eye size, you can actually take the lesser, cross it with the Mojave, and get pretty much the purest stark white snake with the perfect size eyes, bright blue eyes. And I actually pulled up a picture over here of a lesser Mojave. Take a look at this. This is kind of your normal blue-eyed leucistic with normal eyes, just to kind of give you a reference of what the eyes typically would look like in a combination where you don't have the really huge big bug eyes. So take a look at this. You can actually take the lesser. This is the lesser. The lesser's in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, and the lesser's kind of interesting. A lot of times when you mix it in with certain genes, it really brightens and enhances a lot of combinations. But if you actually mix it with another gene in the blue-eyed leucistic, you get the all-white snake with blue eyes. But another thing you can do to get an all-white snake with the lesser is you can also work it into pied, which is pretty interesting. And the pied, this is what a pied looks like. It's actually a recessive gene. gene, so you need 2 copies of the pied for a visual. And it's kind of an interesting anomaly when you work certain genes into the pied. Sometimes you can get a really high white pied. For example, if you actually work Russo into the pied, most of the times you get just a little bit of color here and there. And if you actually work Enchi into a pied, you know, a lot of times you'll get a really low white pied with just a little bit of white on, you know, usually just on the tip of the tail, and most of it has a lot of color. And if you actually work lesser into the pied, I'd say almost, I'm pretty sure every single time you work lesser into pied, you get a completely white snake. But take a look at this, the eye completely changes on a lesser pied to where you get almost like micro eyes. kind of an interesting anomaly as far as kind of the eye. I'd say this kind of looks a little bit more bizarre than even the bug eyes to me. As a matter of fact, I actually have a lesser pied in my collection, and kind of the weird thing about my particular lesser pied, it's an all white snake with really tiny micro eyes, but the eyes on my snake are really bright blue, which I thought a lot of the lesser pieds were blue. And if you actually take a look at this one, it almost looks like it has maybe just a little bit of a reddish tint to it, but it's really dark. I actually pulled up another lesser pied over here. Take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. This is actually a tiny-eyed lesser pied, which is pretty interesting. And kind of the weird thing I've noticed on a lot of these lesser pieds is a lot of them seem like they have almost like a bright red eye, which is the first time I've ever seen a bright red eye on a ball python that didn't have albino in the mix. So it's kind of an interesting anomaly working lesser into the pied. And I'd say it's really interesting because you get these tiny little micro eyes. As a matter of fact, on mine, it seems like the eyes are almost sunken in, where the eye doesn't even start till under the surface of the kind of the top of the snake. It's kind of like on this one too. You can see it's like sunken in a little bit. A really interesting effect with the micro eyes. So here's another one. This is actually the cinnamon, and most of these genes, just as a standalone gene, the eyes look completely normal. If you actually take a cinnamon, you breed it to another cinnamon, you get the super cinnamon. And the super cinnamons can have bug eyes, I'd say, probably not as often as your super lessers. Seems like the super lessers, maybe 50% of the time you have kind of the weird bug eyes. And with the super cinnamons, I'd say it's maybe 10%, maybe less than that. It's kind of interesting, but every now and then you'll get one with a really big bug eyes. And a lot of times when you work super cinnamon into other combinations, it'll also kind of bring the bug eyes along with it. So take a look at this one. I actually pulled this one out. This has some really interesting eyes on this one. This is actually a silver bullet possible pied. So essentially what the silver bullet is, it's the super cinnamon with the pastel. So you have one copy of the pastel with the super cinnamon. And kind of the other weird thing, there's some other genetic defects with the super cinnamon. A lot of times it'll actually change the shape of the head. Sometimes you get a really interesting, you can tell on this one, it's almost like has a short nose or something. And sometimes the noses are kind of flattened out. And it's kind of interesting. Some people are really find these really kind of interesting genetic defects really appealing because they look completely different than all other ball pythons. As a matter of fact, I have a banana Enchi clown in my collection, and it seems like when you work banana in with clowns, sometimes you get a really kind of a weird, like a head shape on a lot of your banana clowns, which is kind of interesting. I think it's kind of cute, you know, some of these weird anomalies in some of the banana clowns. So take a look at this one. This is actually the black pastel. The black pastel is actually allelic with cinnamon. They're really close, but there are differences between the black pastel and the cinnamon. Usually the black pastel is a little bit darker than the cinnamon. It usually has a little bit more like of a reddish gold color on the snake. And if you actually make a super black pastel, you'll actually get the same kind of genetic anomaly with slightly, I'd say it's kind of a slight bug eyes. Not as extreme as the super lesser. Maybe about 10% of the time you'd actually get the bug eyes. And here's what happens if you work a super black pastel into a pied. You actually get the panda pied. And a lot of people are actually, you know, kind of looking at the panda pied. This is like a really amazing snake. And you actually have these patches of really super black, you know, with a really high contrast between the black and the white. And I'd say most panda pies, kind of the hard part about the project, is a lot of them are completely white, or a lot of them have just a little black. you know, just here and there throughout the snake. And kind of the interesting thing, I'd say maybe about 10% of the time you'll actually get these eyes that are a little bit bigger than normal. I'd say this is probably the most extreme example of a bug-eyed that I've seen with the panda pied. So if you know, kind of take into account that this is the extreme example, it doesn't look too bad compared to, you know, some of the super lessers that are just really bugging out there. It's kind of crazy. So that's all I wanted to show you. This one, this is the last one I want to show you. This is actually the pastel gray matter. So sometimes when you're working on these projects, you can actually look at the genes that are in the mix to kind of figure out, all right, am I going to end up with bigger eyes or smaller eyes, or do, you know, is there a risk there, and what is the percentage of the risk? And kind of the interesting thing, this is actually the gray matter is a combination of the super cinnamon and the champagne, if you actually look at the genes over here. So this has the super cinnamon, which tends to have bigger eyes, and it kind of has a weird effect when you mix it with champagne, to where you almost get like this pseudo pied effect with these big white patches, which is kind of interesting. There's not even one copy of pied in here. And the other kind of interesting thing is if you actually take champagne by itself, mix it in with one copy of pied, so you have a champagne het pied. I'd say almost all the champagne het pied look like visual pieds. It's kind of a weird anomaly. If you actually make a champagne pied with 2 copies of the pied, you get an all white snake with no pattern at all. But if you actually, you know, kind of look at, you know, some of the effects of the super cinnamon and the champagne, I was looking through all the different gray matters over here, and it seems like the champagne kind of reduces the effect of the bug eyes in a lot of combinations. This is kind of the most extreme example I could find over here of any bug eyes. It doesn't even look like it has, you know, bigger than normal eyes. And I was kind of amazed that it seems like for some reason in this combination, the champagne really kind of diminishes the effect of the larger eyes in the super cinnamon. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And MMA Trend asks, do bigger ball python males produce bigger hatchlings? And that is a very good question. So pretty much from all the eggs that I've produced here in my collection, I probably produced hundreds of ball python eggs, and I found pretty much across the board that the bigger eggs will produce bigger hatchlings. It's pretty predictable. You have a smaller egg and you get a smaller hatchling, and the bigger eggs come from the bigger, older females. So the bigger your female is and the older it is, usually they lay more eggs, and those eggs are bigger and they actually turn into bigger hatchlings. And kind of the interesting thing is if you actually start with really small hatchlings and big hatchlings, and you get a few months into the, you know, trying to raise up your hatchlings, it doesn't matter really if they started small or if they started big. A lot of times they'll catch up and kind of be on pace with each other. A lot of times they'll reach that certain point where they'll eat just about anything. They'll grow pretty much at the same pace, so it doesn't really matter. Although I do have one ball python female in my collection that is, it seems like it's a locality specific ball python that has a thicker body and a really big head. So I think in some cases you can actually take a bigger female like that and produce really big hatchlings. But other than that, I don't think it really matters the size of the male when you're breeding it to your females. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.